Are you looking for inspiring conversations about faith, film, and life? You're in the right place. Here's the host who knows the right questions to ask, Father Edward Looney.
Hey everybody, it's Father Edward. Grateful you're tuning in for another conversation. And in Detroit, there are lots of holy things to see in Detroit. You could go and pay your respects to Blessed Solanus Casey, ask for a miracle, as that young girl did for her brain tumor and was healed unexplainably, so truly a miracle. There are other holy sites too, like the Basilica of St. Anne and other places you could venture to. Even the St. Joseph Shrine, which is the church where the Latin Mass today is celebrated in the Archdiocese of Detroit. So today I'd like to talk a little bit about Detroit and the St. Joseph, the Worker Mural. This is something I've been aware of since the year of St. Joseph, and grateful to have the guy who was behind it all, Daniel Egan, joining me today just to share a bit more about the mural, the inspiration behind it, and how it really came to be. So thanks so much for joining me today.
Father, it's my pleasure and privilege.
Yeah, well, so what was the inspiration behind putting up the St. Joseph mural in Detroit? Now, a lot of different towns have murals. I live in a small town in Wisconsin, and there are a few different murals on the side of buildings. The town I actually grew up in here in Wisconsin, Oconto, there's a huge debate right now. There's this one guy that wants to bring murals to the buildings, and people
Hmm.
are adamantly against it. And so, Detroit, though, if you drive through the streets, you see the murals. They're on different buildings, and sometimes they could have a political flair. Sometimes they can just have just a beautifying effect as well. Maybe a bird or something like that. So,
Sure.
but what was your inspiration for this?
It's a little hard to pinpoint it exactly, Father. I will say that it is something that just kind of came to mind, I'd say somewhat organically over a period of several years. I'm born and raised in Detroit. I spent some time on various parts of the country and across Europe. Did some religious formation for a minute there. Came back to my roots in Detroit and began my career in business. Around that same time, the church you mentioned, St. Joseph Shrine, was given to the Institute of Christ the King, and I had had a devotion to the traditional Latin Mass already, and so it was this perfect alignment. And so I became very involved in the parish there and very involved in Detroit proper, just as my business was located there. So kind of very plugged into Catholic culture at large and also the city of Detroit. And it just became very clear to me that as our parish was um, really growing rapidly and wanted to kind of plant its flag, or perhaps a better way to put it is to expand our footprint and our influence, our sphere of influence within the city, we're like, we need to get a tangible piece of the visible fabric and culture of Detroit. And where our church is located, it's in the heart of Detroit. It's in a small neighborhood outside of the downtown district called Eastern Market, and it has its roots going back to the mid 19th century. It was really like the one of the largest centers of exchange for farmers and agricultural distributors, and it still is to this day. But one of the interesting aspects of Eastern Market in the last 50 years or so is it's also become something of a center for the arts in Detroit, and not so much the fine arts, but the street arts. And so, anyone who visits Eastern Market you won't be able to walk through there without seeing murals everywhere, on every single open wall, every blank facade. Is covered with a mural of some shape or form. For the most part, these murals are secular, or abstract, or reminiscent of whatever the style is, of kind of graffiti and street arts. And it became clear to me that as our church, which it's not new, it's been on the scene since the 1850s, but we didn't have any sort of piece of that action. And so it became clear to me that as our church was approaching its 150th anniversary, and to your point, the Holy Father had declared 2021, I believe, the year of St. Joseph. It was just kind of this aligning of the stars with this like idea I had in the back of my mind for a couple of years. Um, it just kind of all came to fruition at this point in time where it's like, now's the time to actually see if we can make this happen. And so I worked with assembled a small team, mostly of people associated with my parish and also some of my professional colleagues. And we put together a grassroots campaign to essentially recruit patrons to fund this artistic project to place St. Joseph the Worker, a visible sign of masculinity, but also the virtue of workmanship and fatherhood, and just kind of place him in this already very rich art scene, but to put a stamp of Catholic culture into what was historically a very Catholic town, but was kind of missing a thumbprint, so to speak, in the modern landscape of the art scene. So that's kind of the long story short on the inspiration there, and it was quite an adventure to get to the completion.
Yeah, so you talked a little bit there about finding patrons, and so you have to fund this. And one of the ways you fund it is there's a GoFundMe, and I happened upon it through social media. Donated, I don't know, 25 bucks, $100 to it or whatever. I'm like, I
Yeah.
could get behind this. I think this is a cool project, and I can't wait to see it or whatever. But I think sometimes people think like, okay, you're putting up a mural, like, well, what's the cost behind it? Like, can't you just find an artist who'll paint it for free for the recognition? Or,
Sure.
there's all these different like side conversations people might have about that. So what are the expenses? Why is funding necessary for something like this?
Well, principally, funding is necessary because good things of good value cost money. Certainly, the great, beautiful cathedrals and churches, of our patrimony as Catholics, required sacrifice. They required funding. It required, monetary value to actually engage in the artisans that construct these things. And this was something that was certainly to our ancestors very well understood. And I kind of think what you're hinting at is in some cases, there's this modern sentiment that um, stuff that we do for the church shouldn't cost anything, and that artists should be willing to do these things for free. But the reality is, if you want to hire talented people to put forth something beautiful, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes material costs and talent. And certainly justice would require us to compensate these people fairly for all these efforts. And so, specifically, the project initially was quoted around 20,000. And as we were working to find different locations and the scale of the project evolved, and also, frankly, there's been quite a bit of inflation since the project first initiated. So we had to kind of take those costs into account. But all in all, the project was about $30,000 all in. That included all of the design process and the hundreds of hours of labor that went into it over the course of the time. And keep in mind, it's not a small mural. It's as you saw, in person,
It's
it's
a building.
about 4 stories tall, and about for 20 feet wide. So I mean, it's substantial, and lots of material costs that go into that, of course, and then the cost for all the equipment and the scaffolding to scale the entire size of the building. So it's cliche, but good things do cost money, and you get what you pay for. So we wanted to make sure that if we were going to pay honor to Saint Joseph, we wanted to do it right, and that means you gotta pay for it.
So, who was your artist? How did you find that person or identify who is going to bring St. Joseph to Detroit in this way?
Yes, so the idea came first. Then we went into a process of trying to find an artist who would be a good fit for the project. And so it was important to me that I found someone with Catholic culture kind of imbued in him, a Catholic sentimentality. He didn't necessarily need to be practicing Catholic, although that was certainly very something I was really hoping for. And I also wanted someone local because it was important that I didn't want to bring someone from the outside. Detroit's very proud of its heritage and its talent, its homegrown talent. And so it was important that I found someone local to the area that would be aligned with the vision and hopefully have a real kind of Catholic cultural sentimentality. And I found the perfect guy. His name is Elton Duran. We interviewed several candidates. There were many good qualified ones, but for me, he really stood out. Elton Monroy Duran, he's actually born in Mexico, but he's been in Detroit for many, many years. And he's actually developed quite a reputation internationally for the quality of his mural work. If you do a quick Google search for him, you can find some impressive murals, not only in Detroit, but internationally. And in my one of my early conversations with him, we were just walking around kind of the neighborhood area of St. Joseph. We were still at that phase trying to find a location, and unprompted, he actually mentioned I don't know if it was an encyclical. It was a writing of St. John Paul II, specific to artists that he volunteered that this was actually really influential to him, and it's a letter that John Paul II wrote to artists, and kind of the way Elton described it is it really kind of confirmed him in his understanding that his job as an artist was actually a God-given vocation and something that can bring beauty into the world. And in so doing, bringing beauty into the world, you bring people to God, and you bring people ultimately to holiness and to union with their Creator. And he found that that the way that John Paul II articulated that just kind of cemented his idea for what he wanted to do with his life. And as soon as he started speaking so poetically about that, I realized, okay, I think I've got a good one here, and I want to work with this guy.
That's great. Yeah, that letter you referenced, the letter to artists, that's referenced a lot by people as, kind of a monumental writing that they read that really impacted them in their life in the arts or whatever. So I've heard
Yes.
it referenced many times throughout my life. So um, I think, this mural, it was the initial vision to unveil it during the year of St. Joseph, but then weren't there some like troubles or hiccups along the way? And so it was delayed a little bit, right?
Yeah, to say the least. My business and entrepreneurial mindset, I often struggle, perhaps. I think it's a two-edged sword. In business, there's a lot to be said for acting quickly, and there's something to be said for speed in the marketplace, and that can be very rewarding. And I kind of brought that same mentality to this project. I was like, why can't we get this done in 3 months? We began the campaign in the spring around the Feast of St. Joseph the Worker, and I was foolishly, naively thinking we could get it done by the end of the summer, which in theory would have been possible if everything worked according to plan. But we were obviously working on God's timeline in St. Joseph's. And a series of delays, and I can kind of just touch on the high points. We initially had kind of a handshake agreement with the one of the Detroit public parks. It's called the Detroit uh, DeQuinder Cut. It's a public urban greenway. It goes to the river. It actually cuts right underneath St. Joseph's Shrine. It seemed like an idyllic location, and there was a lot of blank space there that we thought we could take advantage of. That whole deal fell through, and it was very distressing because we initially, thought this was going to be the place, and it that kind of initiated the better part of a 2.5, 3 year journey where we had other handshake agreements and in some cases actually formalized written agreements with other building owners around the neighborhood that initially consented to have us paint a mural of St. Joseph on their building. And um, I would say in certain respects it was for political or reasons of religious concerns. They weren't all that thrilled with the concept. Once we presented them with a concept of St. Joseph, and it became very clear that this was going to be very explicitly Catholic. Some of the initial people we had conversations with at that point got cold feet, unfortunately. Um, but it all worked out for the best. God, Almighty God knew what He was doing. St. Joseph knew what He was doing because um, later on, and was uh, late 2023, we began a conversation with the building owner that eventually in uh, November of 2023, right around Thanksgiving, consented to letting us use his building. Um, and it's perfectly located right across the street from our church. And in fact, right across the street from property that we had just acquired, we're going to be developing, our parish is going to be developing in the coming years to expand our social hall and to hopefully build our school and something of a neighborhood center. And so we didn't know that in 2021 that was going to be happening. And so, by the grace of God, the fact that this project was delayed so long, it actually allowed for us to come to the most ideal location where this mural will not only be in a part of the city, which actually is going to get a lot more traffic than the initial place I had identified, which, it would get foot traffic, but not nearly as many eyes. Where we have it located now, it's on Gratiot Avenue, which is one of the main thoroughfares in and out of Detroit. It's going to get hundreds of thousands of cars passing by on any given week, maybe even more than that. And for me, that was the name of the game, and that was the goal. It was to bring St. Joseph and make him visible into the city. And uh, that I had nothing to do with that, other than I was just knocking on doors and trying to find someone that would be willing to work with us. That really was all St. Joseph and Almighty God's working.
Sure. So when I was in Detroit just a few months ago, and I had gone there, I'm working on a documentary on Solanus Casey on his
Yes,
last 10 years of life. So actually not his time in Detroit, but
sure.
his time in Huntington. But we interviewed some of the friars there.
Yes,
And
yes.
so I was staying at the Embassy Suites by the airport. So I took an Uber to the shrine of Solanus Casey. And as we're driving in from, the route, I see this mural, and it was my intention to go see the St. Joseph mural, and I knew it was by the shrine, and you had sent me some coordinates or whatever, and I thought I would find it, and here we are driving along, and I'm like, I think that's it. I think
Yeah.
that's St. Joseph, and so I looked it up, and sure enough, that was the St. Joseph mural. So I did see it on my drive to the Solanus Casey shrine, but then I made a point to go to the shrine of St. Joseph, got dropped off there, and then I just walked a little bit to find it and to get some photos, take a video, all of that stuff. But yeah, it was something that I didn't expect to see it, and then I found it, was caught off guard. So
He found you.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah. So with a mural, I'm assuming there's like ongoing maintenance that at some point, paint's gonna chip or whatever. So are there plans about that, or how do you address that, or is that just when it comes up?
It's a good question. One of the many benefits of working with the muralist that I did, Elton Duran, is that this is not a new art genre for him, or he's very experienced when it comes to both prepping the wall and then using paints that are designed to last. And so he's assured me that we shouldn't have to do any real maintenance on this for at least a decade. Knock on wood. Certainly, being in the city, vandalism is always a possibility, and certainly being an explicitly religious mural, I'm anticipating we're going to see something, some sort of vandalism in the coming years. Hope, please God, no, but I'm just, you have to kind of, uh, plan for the worst, and so to speak. So we do have some funds in escrow that we're just kind of keeping aside for future maintenance and upkeeps and or corrections. Um, and outside of that, we're also hoping to this spring we're going to be putting some landscaping in front of the mural itself,
Mhm.
and we're going to do some kind of elevated flower planters that hopefully will provide enough of a buffer. Not only will it add additional beauty to the space, but also provide a little buffer to make it a little bit more difficult for vandals. But based on that though, like it's always been very important to me from the very beginning that we do something that's here to last. And so it's one of the reasons why I wanted to hire a muralist who knew how to do this right, but also why we're keeping certain funds aside just for inevitable maintenance because our church has been here 150 years. I want this mural to last for many many years to come, to grow with our parish.
Sure. So here is the mural, and I could probably put this up on a screen as well as B-roll here. But you see Saint Joseph there, and in the background is Mary, and you have these baskets of fruits or vegetables or something like that. Joseph is the worker there, and Mary's in the
Yes.
background, and the church is there. So kind of just showing the devotion to Saint Joseph for all those years. So tell us just a little bit about the mural and the concept behind it, and what you see as you look at it, or what somebody should pay attention to, maybe that they would miss.
Sure. So one of the important aspects of the creative process that our muralist made a huge point of emphasis on was he wanted to bring something to life that ties to the local community. And so that building is on kind of the perimeter of that farmers market that I was referring to, Eastern Market. And as I was referencing, it's a it's the they claim it's the largest farmers market in the Midwest, and I believe the oldest in the United States that's actively running.
Hmm.
And so one of the things he wanted to do was bring forth kind of signs and symbols to tie it to the legacy of this farmers market. And so yes, um, Our Lady and the child Jesus are depicted in something of a vendor's booth where you can see, fresh produce available for sale. It's just kind of to place them in the greater context of the market itself in order to kind of draw people in and to kind of poetically tie things together. Um, then you see Saint Joseph kind of in the foreground of the image, and silently working on um, in his shop, doing woodworking and carpentry work. And one of the things that was really important for Elton, and one of the reasons he was so excited about this project, is he realized, Saint Joseph is just a great model for all men, but also for Detroit, which has a real working class background, to show the importance of duty of state, and for the fact that he was, clearly working on a project, and with his wife and his foster son behind him, our blessed Lord, this sign where he's, or this kind of depiction of how he's clearly working for their benefit, and he's, manifesting his kind of professional skills, while they're in the backdrop there, and he's clearly doing this in some way or shape for them. And that's one of the many remarkable aspects of Saint Joseph's character and his model, and what was something that was really important for our artist to depict, this really valuable image of what a man, and a father and a husband should be. And then yes, we also placed Saint Joseph, the church, Saint Joseph's Shrine, the steeple in the backdrop, just to kind of tie everything together, to not only kind of put a place together with the church, the Eastern Market itself, but then Saint Joseph, the figure who are really trying to bring to the spotlight here in this image. And I think the artist did a fantastic job bringing all those elements together.
Yeah, and I think one of the things too with this is like you could have just had a Saint Joseph like statue image, or something like
Right.
that, and it could have been very overtly religious. But you know what?
Yes.
Like when you look at this, it kind of just blends in with the community, and
Hmm.
it's like if you know, you know, and if you don't know, you're appreciating it, and then you come to find out it's religious, and maybe you
Right.
even have a greater appreciation. So I think it's a good like soft initial conversation that could be had with people because it's not stand out in your face like this is truly a Catholic icon or something like that.
Right. Yeah, it's not like we smacked a holy card on a wall.
Yeah.
It really is, and it's also not sacred art per se, right? Like this style is not something that historically would be in a fresco in a cathedral, right? It's very much kind of its genre and of its place, and to your point, it fits in, and at the same time, I think it tells a story that is both edifying and Catholic in its
Yeah.
in its essence.
So your patrons that have supported it and just also other people in the community, the people that you're, sitting and kneeling next to at mass in the church. What are ordinary people saying about the mural?
Ordinary people are saying all good things. I can't express enough gratitude for the patrons, not only their generosity, and we had donors from all over the globe, honestly, and substantial sums of money from places like uh, France, Ireland, Italy. Most of the money was from here in the States. And surprisingly, um, the majority was actually from outside of our parish, even though our parish was very interested in this project. Um, Frankly, we're so focused on restoring our parish church, and most of our families are kind of working class young families. And truth be told, like there's not a whole lot of extra cash lying around among our parishioners. But the fact that this project got so much attention and interest, both across the country and internationally, that it became very easy to actually raise the money. I was shocked by it. We were able to raise all the funds in less than 3 days. And so, but to answer your question more directly, the feedback's been very, very positive, and I couldn't be more grateful to their generosity, but also the patience. This project took a lot longer than I initially anticipated, and so the expectations that I set for a lot of the donors um, was a little bit offline from what we eventually um, landed on. But by the grace of God, everyone was very understanding, and I'm so appreciative for that.
So have you as a parish, your pastor, the vicar there, or anyone else,
Yes.
like have you gone in procession to pray the litany of Saint Joseph before the mural? Has there been any like exercise of public religiosity before it?
Our parish is very good at having processions.
Yeah, I figured.
Of course, of course, we do the standard Corpus Christi procession every year, but also on the Feast of Saint Joseph in April, and also in the Feast of Saint Joseph the Worker, we have public processions. This coming Feast of Saint Joseph the Worker, we will be having another public procession, and it's not official yet whether or not we will incorporate the blessing of the mural in that procession, but there will be a public blessing of the mural either before or just after that procession, or maybe a part of it. The details are still TBD. I've been giving the canons a little time to breathe after the Easter Triduum liturgies, as I'm sure you can understand. So we're
Yeah.
kind of finalizing those details. But
It's
yes, it's
just a
always been
few days
very
away.
right. Right. I know, true. But we're going to finalize that very soon, and it's always been important for me from the very beginning that we make holy the space, not only visually but also taking advantage of the church's um, beautiful book of blessings, and making sure that we also sanctify the space through God's graces.
Yeah, the old archbishop, whose name escapes me right now. Um,
Bishop Vigneron, yes.
yeah, yeah. Bishop Vigneron, Archbishop Vigneron. Was he aware of the project? And do you have any interest in reaching out to the new archbishop and asking him to come see it and whatnot?
Yes, so Bishop Vigneron, Archbishop Vigneron, I was uh, in communication with him in his office from the very beginning of the project, and he was so supportive, and I was incredibly grateful for that. And I also let him know when we had some kind of unforeseen setbacks, and he ensured me of his prayers. And um, I was really so grateful we were able to complete this project before his time in Detroit expired. I've kind of sent him a formal letter and with images of the final project, and he extended his congratulations and his appreciation of the project. I have not yet been in contact with the new archbishop, but certainly we will be extending the invitation for his attendance, and hopefully he'll be able to join us.
Yeah, well, wonderful. Do you think this could influence other places, like they see what you've done and this mural, and could it kind of lay the blueprint for a different place, whether that's Oklahoma City or Dallas,
Yes,
Texas, or whatever? Could somebody else pick this up and do something similar?
certainly would love if that was to happen. I've already had a couple conversations with some kind of people in a similar position to mine that just think this is a good idea in their particular community or town or city. And I had one extensive conversation a couple weeks ago where someone was just trying to kind of pick my brain and strategize about how to go about planning the funding and how to go about finding a location. I am a big believer that if we're serious Catholics, if we're serious about evangelizing, if we're serious about bringing the culture to Christ, beauty is one of the most effective tools to do that. And this isn't my idea. This is our this is our patrimony. This is how Holy Mother Church has operated from really the very beginning. I mean, you look at the great ecclesiastical architecture. You look at the great artists that are housed in all the art museums across the world. So much of that has its roots in Catholic identity, Catholic culture, and the Catholic mindset. And so I've just it was almost instinctive to me that if we're going to be serious about bringing the culture to Christ, we need to be serious about encouraging the arts and bringing beauty to the forefront. And so I'm hoping that this project could perhaps be an inspiration not only for more work like this in my city. I actually think there's plenty of opportunity to do more than just a single mural of St. Joseph. But I would love it if this could perhaps provide some inspiration and some kindling to do this in other cities. And to the extent that I can assist with that and help with that, I am more than happy to.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful. Well, you've done good work, and to really promote St. Joseph and to spread devotion. And, so many people see him, whether they realize it or not. But
Yes,
what a grace that is for people. And to know that St. Joseph prays for us and is such a great example for us, and how you and the artists and others have really taken to St. Joseph. So, yeah, it's a wonderful reminder of the communion of the saints and the Holy Family for sure.
so true, so true. And they're with us. They're constantly interceding for us, and I think bringing them visibly into the space just reminds us of that awesome reality. And it's just been my honor to be a part of this. I can't take credit for really anything other than I worked with a couple guys who put together a GoFundMe, and I was foolish enough to think we could actually get the thing done. Um, Truthfully, it wasn't my work, because I got so frustrated throughout in the middle of all the things that were going wrong. I was almost ready to give up, but by the grace of God, we got through it, and St. Joseph really made it happen.
Well, that's wonderful. So if people want to find it, you just go to the St. Joseph Shrine and you kind of mosey on over to the main road and you can find it, right?
Yeah, if one of the simplest ways to see it is if you go to St. Joseph's Shrine, if you park in the parking lot right in front of the church, you walk all the way towards the main road, still in the parking lot. And if you just look to the right, you'll see it. It's actually visible from the edge of the parking lot there. And you can also go to, if you just do a Google search for the Worker Mural, or if you look at our posts on Instagram and on X under the Worker Mural, you'll also find the coordinates there specifically where it is.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Daniel, for the conversation today, just to raise awareness. And, I'm a big Packer fan. Football season's around the corner. If people are going to a Detroit Lion game, I think you got to seek out the Worker Mural, and you got to go see Solanus Casey.
I can endorse everything you said there, except being a Packer fan, Father.
Well, thanks so much for your time today.
Hey, the pleasure was mine.
If you liked today's episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening. And don't forget to stay up to date with what Father Edward is doing by following him on Facebook, X, or Instagram at the handle @FREdwardLooney. Thanks for listening, and please join Father Edward again next time for another inspiring conversation.